7. It we're there talking about the authority of Jesus being questioned. And is there anybody we need to be in our prayers today? Does anybody have anybody new? We need to continue with Don, and Mr. Gene's here, and this guy right here is here. And then also, when Matt's doing a lot better. He's fixing to get to go back to work, I think, next week, Kim? This coming, tomorrow. And so he's doing better. And so if there's anybody that anybody has. How's Pauline doing? Okay. All right. Well, if you would bow, and we'll have a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you for this day you've given us. Thank you for this time we have to study your word. Father, also at this time, continue to be with Don and continue to be with Pauline. And Father, just help them that they may just put your hand on them and help them to be as comfortable as they can. Be with Don, help him to get well and find out what all's wrong with him, and help him that he may again be as they may again be with us. Father, be with those in a nursing home. Father, be with us as we study your word. Father, help us to understand it as you'd have us to. And Father, help us to always realize that's how we learn more about you, is by studying, and also how we become closer. Thank you so much for loving us and caring for us. Be with Todd and Anna as they're away and traveling, and keep them safe. Be with all the others that are traveling. Watch over them. Thank you so much for your son. In his name, amen. And again, we're going to be in Mark 20, verse 27. I think all the lights are on, but I'm not seeing that good, so y'all have to bear with me just a little bit. All right, it says, they arrived again in Jerusalem, and while Jesus was walking in the temple courts, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders came to him. By what authority are you doing these things? They asked him, and who gave you the authority to do it? And, first off, we know that Jesus wasn't a chief priest, or he wasn't an elder, and, he wasn't a scribe, and or a teacher of the law, but it says that the chief priests, they were the head of the 24 divisions of priests. And it says David had divided the priests into 24 divisions. The head of each division was called a chief priest. The scribes were those who copied the law of Moses, and in doing this, they became experts in the law of Moses. And you just think about this. These guys didn't have copy machines. Every time a new one was put out there, these guys wrote this, and they did it again and again and again. So they did become, that's why they were called expert in the law, because they really were, because they copied it, And it says the elders, they really weren't so much have anything to do with the church, other than they worked together. It says they were the rulers of the city, and of course in this case they were the rulers over Jerusalem. And but the scribe, they all kind of worked together, and I think mainly just to kind of so they could all get along. But so Jesus, they're questioning his authority. And since Jesus, he was not a chief priest or a scribe or an elder, these men felt that Jesus did not have the authority to do what he did or to teach what he taught. and they wanted to embarrass Jesus and stop him by bringing up this question. So, it's what's kind of shocking to me is why would you think at this point with these chief priests or the scribes, why would they question Jesus? I mean, have y'all thought about this? These people, how many times has Jesus, when they asked him questions and tried to trap him and try to do these, try to trick him, did he make them look like, they looked like complete idiots sometimes, and most of the time when Jesus got done with them. And it says in 29, here we go, sorry. Jesus replied, I will ask you one question. So they had asked him this question, and so Jesus, he puts it back on them right here. He says, in 29, it says, Jesus replied, I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I am doing these things. And the question is, John's baptism, was it from heaven or from men? And he says, tell me. And then, Jesus, he threw it back on them. He didn't answer their question directly, but he says, if you'll answer, I'll answer your question if you'll answer my question. And then he said, the authority was, we know that the authority that Jesus had was from God, but Jesus had a plan at this point. His plan was to get his disciples and his apostles to the point that he wanted them to be before he was crucified. So he was still teaching his apostles at this time. So he did not tell them the answer straight out, because if he had have said that he was from God, that he was the Son of God, they would have started, just like they did when he says so later, So he instead of answering the question, he puts it to them directly. He said. Let me think. Let's see here where it's at. Okay. And then in verse 30, he asked them, he said, John's baptism, was it from men or was it from, he said, the baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men? And then they didn't believe in John the Baptist. They didn't believe in Jesus. They thought, but they were also scared of the people because, these people here, they were scared in a way. They were scared of Jesus and his teaching. But they were also scared of what they would say if they just come straight out and said they didn't believe in John the Baptist. They were afraid because the people believed that John the Baptist was a prophet. And if he was really a prophet, also, if, excuse me, I said that wrong. If he was a prophet, or the people, they would probably have stoned him, and describe these people right here. Yeah. And here it says that they did not believe that John the Baptist was from God, but they were afraid to say so, and that John was not a prophet because of the people, and that the people would have probably, there's a notation here, there's a good chance they'd have been stoned if they had denied that he wasn't a prophet, if they said he wasn't a prophet. Okay. Verse 33, it says, so they answered Jesus, we do not know. And then, of course, Jesus, he comes back then and says, Jesus says, well, neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things. And they answered Jesus, we did not know. And, of course, they did know. They actually lied to Jesus because they had their opinion. And, you know, but again, they were scared to answer this question. And, you know, also, what you think is then that makes you think that the leaders, or it tells you that the leaders weren't honest men to start with, you know. And the question of an honest man is, you know, if you're known as an honest person, then, you know, it's a reputation that you get. But if, like these people here, you know, if they were respected out of fear, the people, instead of out of being a true honest person, you know, because of their position. It says, since they would not answer John's teachings were from God, they would not admit that Jesus was Son of God, and had authority to do that. You know, that's what they refused to accept to start with, and then in the end, that's the reason they'll use to crucify Jesus.
What we see over and over, I know all of us ask, how could they not see? How could they, if they saw, how could they? Satan blinds us to what our senses, what our good sense would tell us is true. If we want something else, he will expand that and just crowd out. If we have those inklings of, well, maybe this isn't, man, he's going to hit hard, but look at what you've got. Look at what you could have. Look at if you continue in this path. Satan has done a masterful job all along. I mean, they didn't get to this point overnight. They've been consumed with power and authority and renown, position, all of this for years. And their lack of respect and care for the people, where Jesus pointed out, like, you are no shepherd. You know, they're not only not being taken care of, they're being abused. Satan is powerful.
Eddie, this idea that when they ask these questions, they're trying to trap Jesus. And if you will remember when we studied the fishers of men, we talked about this phenomenon of these questions that you get that kind of trap you in. Like, for instance, do you mean that my grandmother is not going to heaven? You know, those kind of questions. And we were taught to follow that up with a question of your own. Like, well, what makes you think that? Or what makes you say that? And that concept, that's exactly what Jesus does. He turns their question that they're trying to trap him with. He turns it right around and asks them the question back.
Yeah, and you're correct in saying that. But what really, you know, what I'm amazed at is how many times have they asked these questions or tried to trap Jesus and been burnt so bad? But they don't. I'll say this for them: they don't give up. They kept trying right to the end. And yes, yeah. And it, you know, and it tells us that a number of times in the scriptures that Jesus knows our hearts, knows what's in a man, and knows the thoughts of men. You know, so these guys really were fighting a losing battle right here from the very start. First off, if they'd have listened to John, they'd have knew that they were fighting against God. You know, and
The chief priests would have sent somebody, go and do this. When they came back and said, well, and then they give their version of the story so they don't look quite so bad. Just like when we send our kid to get something and come back and say, I couldn't find it. Well, if I'd gone, I would have found it.
yeah,
You know, it's if I'd done it, you can just picture different ones thinking, well, if I'd been there, it would have been different.
yeah. Yeah, what he's preaching is what Jesus is teaching is gonna change their way of life. You know, when they admit that Jesus is the Son of God, what need is there going to be for a chief priest, for a scribe? You know, they're out of business right at that point, right there. Okay, our next one is the parable of the tenants, and I love how Jesus answered the crowd and the Jewish leaders in this parable, and he goes about it. You read this, and if you just read this through, you think, I'm not sure what they're talking about here. But this is a great parable, and this is a great lesson right here. And it says, Jesus began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it. He dug a pit for the winepress, and he built a watchtower. Then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and moved to another place. Okay, we're going to stop right there for a second. And, first off, vineyards were very important during this time right here. That's not only was it really profitable for farmers and stuff, but, they used wines as medicine. They used wines in cooking. They used wines and all sorts of things. And then that's not counting the use they had for the grapes themselves, And so they planted this vineyard, and it says, at harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenant to collect from them some of the fruits of the vineyard. And it says, in verse 3, it says, but they seized him, beat him, and sent him away empty-handed. And then he sent another one in verse 4. It says, then he sent another servant to them. They struck this man on the head, and they threatened him shamefully. And then in verse 5 it says, he sent still another, and that one they killed. He sent many others, and some of them they beat, and the others they killed. And, that's in verse 5, it says, some of the servants they beat, and some they killed. This is the way the Jewish leaders treated the prophets of God. How many great prophets did God have in the Old Testament? And, how often were they not persecuted? How many prophets can you name that weren't persecuted in some way? It talks about in 1 Kings 19 and 2 Chronicles 24, and then also in 21. It talks, all these are different times that the prophets were persecuted. And it says, the thing is that the landowners kept giving the tenants chance after chance. It says, this indicates the great patience that God has. God has long suffering towards men. He gives them chance after chance to repent. Think about, each one of you, think about your life before you became a Christian, and how you lived, the things you did, and the patience that God had to have for each one of us. I know I was 24 before I became a Christian, and I'm sure some of you became a Christian at an early age, but some of you were like me. You were kind of hard-headed, and God. It's the thing about it is, it's such a great thing that God. He also knows our hearts, but He has patience, and it's like He's much greater than a good father to a kid. That how many times as a kid do we goof up, and our parents come in there and tell you, you might even get a spanking out of the deal, but they tell you, you'll do better next time. That's kind of the way Jesus is with us. He's patient with us, and He gives us these different chances, and he loves us more than our parents loved us. You know, when you think about that, he loves us more than we can comprehend, and he's patient with us, and he gives us the time and the chances to become Christians, as you know, as we are here today. And you know, we just need to be thankful that God loved us enough to have the patience that he gives us. Okay. And then in verse 6, it says, "But he had one left to send, a son whom he loved. He sent him last of all, saying, 'They will respect my son.'" And, you know, that's what we just got finished in the other section, in Jesus' authority being questioned. You know, but it didn't happen, did it? You know, Jesus came to earth. Of course, you know, we know that it was a plan, but still, Jesus came to earth and he gave his life, and that's what they're talking about in these tenets here. You know, as a last resort, because men didn't do what they should have done. God had to send his son. Jesus had to come and give his life. And that's what this whole parable is about right here. And, you know, it also shows how many chances God gave the Jews, but it also tells us how many chances we're given. And it's the same way with us. You know, we think, well, these are, you know, we kind of look down at the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but how often are we Pharisees and Sadducees? You know, we need to think about that. We need to remember that this applies to us just like it did to them. And you think, you know, well, why didn't they understand this? Why didn't they see that? But, you know, if we look out into the world, look how many empty seats are in here. And you think how many people are in Madill. You know, there's a lot of people out there that, there's a lot of Pharisees and Sadducees out there, aren't they? And maybe there's some in here, you know, we don't, only God and Jesus knows what's in a man, you know. So we need to remember that, that this verse 6, that God came down to the last point there, that God sent his son. And it says, and it's going to get into that in just a second here. Yeah. Oh, no problem. And then at 7 it says, "But the tenants said to one another, 'This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours.'" You know, and this is another thing that really, you know, they evidently really didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. Why would you? Because if they had have, why would you still kill the Son of God? I mean, you know that you're not going to win in that situation. So these people, just to me, their hearts were hardened, and Jesus knew their hearts, so he went ahead and let them stay that way. And then in verse 8 it says, so they took him and they killed him and they threw him out of the vineyard. So they just, just like they did Jesus, they took him and they didn't care what happened after when Jesus was put to death, they thought, well, we've won this battle. It's gone, But it wasn't that way, was it? It says, but this occurred to them that 3 days later that they hadn't won the battle. And in verse 9 it says, what then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyards to others. And this is kind of what Kim was talking about. And so who do y'all think the others are? That's right, it's us. And then Jesus now asks the question to the people that he's speaking to. He says, the Matthew account says that the audience answered this question. So there was only one logical answer. The owner of the vineyard will be punished. And it says, these wicked tenants, the owners will give the vineyard to someone who will take care of it and give the payment to the owner when due. So, in putting it this way, so they're going to, the tenant owners are going to change, aren't they? And it's going to go to those that believe in God. It's going to go to those that believe that Jesus is who he is and is going to do what he says he's going to do. And so Jesus and God, they're going to give this vineyard to the people. They're going to give it to the Gentiles, to the believers. And these people, the Sadducees and the Pharisees and these religious leaders, they had this opportunity and they fought so hard to keep it, but then they lost it in the end anyway. And then the thing about it is not only did they lose that, but then if they didn't change their ways, they lost their soul. And it says now the question is that we are to ask ourselves, what kind of tenant are we? I'm not asking for an answer. I'm just saying we need to always think about this, examine ourselves, and ask: Do we serve God the way we should serve God? And are we a good tenant? Are we a tenant that God's going to continue to let us be over the vineyard? And, it don't come out yet, but it's fixing to come out that sacrifice that they were making in that temple was soon to be complete. Was going to be unnecessary, the sacrifice was going to be given for us from a death. In verse 10, it says, haven't you read this passage of Scripture? The stone, the builders rejected, has become the cornerstone. And that comes from Psalms 118, 22 through 27. And, so that's what they're talking about here is this parable that we've just been talking about. That parable that Jesus was rejected. And but he also, in that rejection, Jesus becomes the cornerstone and what the church is built upon, and our way to get to heaven. This is, like I said, to me, this is really this is one of my favorite parables right here, and it sure makes you think a lot. Well, I think it's kind of a parable in itself, where there's a change, and the change is going to be they're no longer, like you were talking about, there's no longer a need to go into a building and make a sacrifice when we have that sacrifice. That sacrifice was given for us when he gave his life for us. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
How the Catholic Church has sustained rituals, and I don't know about you guys, but I've heard many people say, well, I like the rituals. That's a big part of the attraction, is having these things they do that they can then have an obvious proof that they did something right,
Yeah.
something they were supposed to do. That's a whole lot easier to do than with the heart.
We're the same way. I mean, we come and we worship on Sunday morning, and we do it in a orderly fashion. We do it the same way every week. And, it really wouldn't matter if we came in and preached first, and then sang songs, and then and took the communion last. It really would, as long as we do the things that we're commanded to do, then that's fine. The order, but if you change, it bothers people sometimes. We don't like change. We like to have it wrote down in 1, 2, 3, and 4. Go ahead.
Whenever I was in Greece, there was a Greek Orthodox church that I went to visit, and it was right before April, and this lady was pressuring me, what I was. I said, I'm a Christian, but what kind? I there's only one kind.
Yeah.
What church do you go to? And I said, I go to the Church of Christ. And she went, and then there was another lady that come up to me. She was a member of the Church of Christ. And through talking, I felt comfortable with asking her, why are you here? And she said, it's tradition. Since I was a little girl, this is what I've done. But I don't believe it. And I think sometimes we just have to save face. And maybe she was doing that amongst her neighbors and her friends, But I found that to be odd. And with you talking, that just came to mind that it's because tradition. But I don't believe it.
Yeah.
But I'm still doing it.
Yeah. That when we were in, when the lady wanted us to kept talking, we were on a train, and there was about 4 of us from the church, and we all had a little lesson and took communion. And then when we went to, And so when we went in there, this lady comes and says, well, now y'all have to take her the communion here, you know. And, you know, it's sort of like what she's talking about, you know. These people, you know, and, you know, don't get me wrong, we can be the same way. I knew some people that weren't members of the church. And, you know, it was so important to do certain things on Sunday, you know, but then the rest of the week, you know, they would talk like sailors, and they drank, and they lived as the world do. Now, that don't mean that's, you know, we can get tied up in the same thing. That's why it tells us that we need to be on guard always. So, you know, it's easy for us to get caught up into the world. Did you say? Okay. It's 12 says, the chief priests and the teachers of the law and the elders looked for a way to arrest him because they knew he had spoken the parable against them, but they were afraid of the crowd, so they left him and went away. But that, that don't mean that they gave up, does it? But the thing about it is, if they had have gave up, we would not have the opportunity that we have. I think it's about time here. We'll have a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you so much for your Son. Father, thank you for sending him for us, and thank you for the life that he gave for us. Father, help us to remember that we were given a chance to be with you in heaven, that we need to take this chance. We need to live the life we should live. We need to study your word. We need to strive to be as close to you as we can. Thank you so much for all that you do for us, and thank you for loving us. In your Son's name, amen.